And welcome to another book spotlight. Today we're looking at the book A Red Dark Night. And why are there two copies? Because there's two separate editions released. This is the first edition, came out in 2004, pretty a rare find. And then this one is the second edition, which came out in 2011. And it's basically more or less the same. The only difference is there was some flaws in here when it first came out that I wanted to correct, and when I finally got around to it, it was much 7 years later, but I got it done. And so we got the new copy, which is the one that's on for sale right now, and readers are enjoying it. But what's cool about this book is a few things. One is, okay, first people, the title, A Red Dark Night. It sounds kind of backwards. You shouldn't be like a dark red night, you know? So that kind of, I like that idea that it's just a kind of a backwards title in that context. The other thing that was fun about this book was this was the fourth book I ever wrote. And the goal with the book was to write basically a love letter to B horror. I like B horror. It's evident on my channel. It's evident on my blog posts. It's evident everywhere that I've mentioned it. And so it's been my thing. So I started with that concept, and the idea was I had it, take place at a camp. There's a killer on the loose. There's pretty girls. All those tropes, right? Because again, it's supposed to be B horror. And then what happened was about halfway through the book, I wrote myself into a major corner. I basically put the characters in a situation where it was downright impossible for them to get out of. And we're like, these are regular people we're talking about, so there's no superpowers, there's no magic, there's no nothing, and there's no like fancy martial arts skills to get rid of the bad guy. It's like literally they were physically like in the corner, screwed. And so I was stuck, and it took, I would say, a couple weeks maybe of just kind of thinking, or in the background thinking, like, how am I going to get out of this? I don't want to waste all the writing that I just did, and start over. And the way the story goes, the way I write is the story is going in a certain direction, and then for me to backtrack and have to veer off into like a different direction, well, I didn't want to do that, especially at the time, it being my fourth book. I'm still a learning writer, and we're all learning writers. It's forever a thing, but yeah, so I didn't want to do that because I didn't know how to properly execute that either. So I had to come up with a way to get these people out of a jam. And then I figured it out, and when I did, though, the story, took a major turn, like a huge turn, which in the end actually made the story much, much better. And it brings about, I can't get into it without spoiling it, because I remember these aren't spoiler videos. But I think it takes it in a place where it's unique and fun and cool, and of course, it's a red dark night. So, and then lastly, in terms of behind the scenes regarding this book, this first edition here, that's my art, for example, is I actually started writing this book at my day job at the time. I mean, this is 20 years ago, so go ahead and tell them I was doing this on hours. But I started, I had an idea, and it was at a call center, and it happened to be a day where calls were very kind of few and far between, so there was some downtime, and I started this sucker up, and 2 weeks later it was done. Well, 2 weeks worth of writing time, that is, because remember there was that period where I had to kind of figure out the problem I caused. And what was also interesting about this book, from a developmental creative point of view, was I learned how to do cover art. This cover was constructed this is before there were like templates and all this stuff that made things easier for you. This is kind of like where you had to build your cover, measure it out from like ground zero, and I just kept screwing it up over and over and over and over and over again. Fortunately, I knew a book cover designer at the time, and she straightened things out for me and explained to me, like, this is how you do it. Again, this is at the time where there was no templates or nothing, and so I learned like cover construction based off this book in terms of behind the scenes stuff. And then later on, when it came time for the second edition, of course, putting the cover together was a non-issue, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. I mean, this one, the cover, of course, needed improvement, but at the time, Small press titles had different types of covers like this, like unique, different takes. It's not how it is now, where everything's like very uniform and very standard and very book story and all the rest. Like small press at the time were very creative with their covers and that sort of thing. And it's one of the things I loved about the small press and why I kind of stuck in that arena as opposed to trying to move up, because there's so much more creative freedom. And now again, that was at the time. Of course, things have changed. But anyway, what's this book about? Well, I'll read it to you and I'll tell you. So, here we go. Many summers ago, an evil presence known as a Bloodan visited Camp Silverway, a peaceful summer camp for teenage girls, and nearly killed a young girl named Shelly. Mary Thompson, a girl on a bunk bed near Shelly, watched as the creature made from blood and darkness began to sink into Shelly and begin to feed. Through tears and cloudy vision, she also saw her friend rescued by a stranger in a black cape with blue fire blasting from his hand. Never forgetting that night, Mary was tormented for years by the memory of what she saw, and now, 22 years later, she has returned to Camp Silverway as a camp counselor, trying to face her fear. However, what starts out as a fun summer soon comes to an end when not one, but several Bloodans return to the camp and begin killing again. As before, the man in the black cape, Tarek, reappears, yet he hasn't aged a day since he rescued Shelly long ago. Shock upon shock ensues as Mary learns not only where the creatures and her hero come from, but also when. The Bloodans enclose the camp in a liquid red dome made of blood, and as everyone around her gets killed and the monsters multiply, Mary, her friend Sarah, and Tarek are left with no place to go, except for maybe one. And there you have it. That's the plot synopsis for A Red Dark Night. I think it's an underrated book in terms of the recognition that it's gotten. And I don't mean that from a prideful point of view. I mean that just simply that it's a book that doesn't do as well in the market as I thought it would. But the people, when they do buy it and do read it, they really like it. So, again, I encourage you to check it out. Thank you so much for tuning into this book spotlight. I hope you enjoyed the little background on the two editions and how that all works. And yeah, I do have a couple copies of these left, so if you're looking for something rare, let me know. But if not, otherwise, this is available everywhere in paperback and ebook. Just pick your favorite vendor and go from there. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next book spotlight. Like, subscribe, comment, share. You know how it goes, right? Okay. Cheers.